Senator Hashmi, we have Senate Bill 235.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. SB 235 seeks to amend Section 22.2, 18.8 of the Code of Virginia, which was adopted in 2022. You may recall that that particular legislation was carried by then Senator Donovan, and it directed the Department of Education to adopt model policies that each school board would then adopt policies as outlined by the Department of Education, and each school board could adopt policies either consistent with or even more comprehensive than those model policies. And these policies would ensure parental notification of instructional material that includes sexually explicit content. Now, that bill, as it passed out of the two chambers that year and as it was signed into law, included a fourth enactment clause that provided that the provisions of this act shall not be construed as requiring or providing for the censoring of books in public elementary and secondary schools. And while this enactment clause appears in our Acts of Assembly and in the hard copy of the code, it does not appear in the online version, and therefore it really has not been part of the ways in which this policy has been enacted. And instead of giving parents a choice regarding the books that or the materials that their children may or may not read, some school divisions have actually used the statute as a basis to remove books entirely from the school. Some school divisions have established procedures. Now, most school divisions have already established procedures for challenging and removing books from their schools, and those policies should be followed rather than misusing this parental consent statute as the basis for such decisions. So one thing we want to make clear is that parental notification and parental consent does not equal the granting of some to the right to remove books completely from the school or from classroom libraries. Now, the original patron of this bill said that that was her intent, but the way in which this the legislation has now been carried out in many school divisions is quite the opposite. So we have some school divisions, for example, that has cited this 2022 parental consent law as a basis for actually removing 30 books from its schools rather than following its own established challenge procedures. Another locality has also cited this law as one basis for its school library and media center policies that include a requirement that no materials that contain sexually explicit content should be acquired for a school or classroom library. So these actions taken by these localities have absolutely nothing to do with parental consent. They are clear acts of censorship. So this prohibition on using the parental consent statute for purposes of censorship makes it clear that the removal of books from schools is not the purpose of the law that was passed in 2022. And this legislation seeks to reinstate that critical clause at the end, and that begins in line 24, that, however, nothing in this section or any model policy or amendments thereto adopted by the department pursuant to subsection B or any policy or amendments thereto adopted by a school board pursuant to this subsection shall be construed as permitting the censoring of books in any public elementary or secondary school. This legislation is strongly supported by our Virginia Library Association, and I know that we have some individuals here who would like to speak to the legislation.
Yeah, why don't we can take testimony and then we'll get to the committee. So why don't we have the folks who support the bill come up first, and we'll do 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I am Lisa Varga, Executive Director of the Virginia Library Association. The members of VLA greatly support Senator Hashmi introducing SB 235, which we strongly support. As Senator Hashmi has noted, the original 2022 legislation contained an enactment clause providing this parental consent statute should not be construed as authorizing censorship. Rather than giving parents the right to consent to their child having access to sexually explicit instructional material in the classroom or to request alternative non-explicit instructional material, some school divisions have simply used this statute as basis for removing materials from the school. This is a clear violation of the statute's prohibition on censorship. Such actions ignore and bypass established challenge procedures for the removal of instructional materials from the classroom and school libraries. Enactment clauses do not appear in the online version of the code and can be easily overlooked in the hard copy version. Moving the prohibition on censorship into the body of the statute as proposed in SB 235 will make it clear the statute is about parental consent and not the removal of books from schools. This is a very simple change and does not alter in any way the substance of the current law. The members of the Virginia Library Association urge you to approve SB 235. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Judy Dykman. I am a past president of Virginia Association of School Librarians, and I am speaking on behalf of the organization today in support of SB 235. The language added in regards to the censoring of books is a much-needed addition to the Code of Virginia that was enacted last year. I know that several districts in the state have censored library and school selections under the previous verbiage, whether intentional or not, while trying to abide by the law. Dr. Coons last June issued a state superintendent memo trying to clarify the issue between library materials and instructional materials also. Virginia Association of School Librarians always stands on the side of free access to books by our students and the students' right to choose a selection to read, and against any type of censorship or banning of book selections. We also firmly believe that parents and guardians should have the right to discuss and choose reading selections for their own children. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the subcommittee. My name is Brianna Diaz, and I represent the ACLU of Virginia, and we support SB 235. SB 235 seeks to resolve one of the issues created with the enactment of SB 656, the law establishing the model policies on sexually explicit content. While SB 656 contained an enactment clause, some school districts or their district superintendents have misapplied the law, using it to target books deemed sexually explicit and ban them. The automatic removal of challenged books from circulation, preventing any student's access, is censorship that contradicts the law's express limitations. The law, both in the words of its proponents and by its plain terms, is designed to expand parental choice about what material their students access, not to ensure that a small group of parents can place books beyond the reach of any student. SB 235 will correct this wrong and provide school boards the clarity they need. It is for these reasons we ask you to support the bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Narissa Rahman, here on behalf of Equality Virginia. We support the bill for the reasons outlined by our partners.
Good afternoon, Mike Carabinos. I've been a parent, kind of on the front line of a lot of these conversations throughout this last few years regarding challenges to books. And I'll say the same thing, the spirit of this proposal and the spirit that I try to push forward is, as a parent, you might have the right, absolutely, to decide what your child can read. You do not have the right to decide what my child can read. These laws, these bills, and these efforts have consistently been used to try to limit what my child has access to within the schools. That has to stop. This is the first step. This should not be the only step. These books need protection. We need to remember that people banning books have never been the good guys throughout history. And removing a book from a school is a ban, and it is censorship, and we should oppose it just on principle alone. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Chairman, we're not in full committee, I know. Sorry. Yeah. Shane Riddle with Virginia Education Association. We appreciate the patron bringing this language to clarify. But I want to also qualify the statement of support by saying that, of course, we believe books should be age appropriate. And the speaker that was just before me, parents do have that right? To opt their kids out of that. Of course, we believe that books should be age appropriate, and we know that divisions are following these policies, right? But just to give you an example, many school boards in this Commonwealth have banned books like To Kill a Mockingbird, banned books like Huckleberry Finn. And I would urge everyone here today and even online that are watching that the play To Kill a Mockingbird is coming to Richmond. It's going to be at the Altria at the end of February. I bought a ticket. I'm going to see that. The first time I saw the play was at the Ford Theater in D.C. And the book is wonderful. The author, Harper Lee, is wonderful. It's a great, great novel that we should all read. So we support this bill, and we thank you, Senator Hashmi, for sponsoring it. Thank you.
Shane, maybe I'll see you there. Those that are in opposition, come on up and speak.
Again, Ann Tatus. And to follow up with his point is that the books that we're talking about, nobody's talking about Maya Angelou. We're not talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. This book here, let's talk about it. And if there's any minors in the room or watching online, I ask you to leave. And please don't try to Tim Anderson me, because I'm going to read this book to you. Is that we're talking about books that talk about fingering buttholes, anal butt plugs. This is Chesterfield County, with images, if you can see that, okay? It talks about if you're not into sex, go online and you can find access to kink if you're into hanging people from ceilings. This is what we're talking about, okay? And to her point is that you've always been able to challenge books and have them removed. It's actually 2 or 3 different Virginia codes. That's not new. If school divisions are inappropriately citing this, then that's the conversation that needs to be had. But this is nothing but an effort to continue to keep books like these, and they are numerous. And Chesterfield County having 35 picture transgender books for kindergartners, that's what we're talking about, is that then they block, some principals will be like, just notify me of what my kid checks out, right? It's common sense. No, child rights. No, I'm sorry, parental rights. That's what we're doing, that's why we can't even come to an agreement here, is because they want to keep books like these in our schools. And so we're not talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm not talking about Huckleberry Finn. I'm talking about blatant graphic sexual pornography that is destroying the prefrontal cortex of children who will never be the same afterward, is what we're talking about.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Todd Gackey on behalf of the Family Foundation. We were here for the debate when the bill first passed, and the intent was to make sure the parents had a right to opt their child out of any curriculum that was being taught in the classroom that contained sexually explicit material. Now, it's not uncommon for material to also be brought in from the library and to be used for teaching and instruction. And so we also know that school boards have a broad latitude in terms of making sure that what is in their school libraries is age appropriate. And I want to direct you to the attention of a case out of Missouri, CKW versus Winsville, in which the judge opined this: the district's policy does not ban the district's students from reading the books at issue here, nor does it ban students from acquiring the books or lending the books to others. Students may borrow the books from the public library or from a friend or neighbor. They likewise are free to purchase the books. The policy does not even ban the students from bringing the books to the district schools and then sharing them with their friends. The judge went on to say the school district does not ban a book when, through its authorized school board, it decides not to continue possessing a book on its own library bookshelves. They have the authority to determine what's on their library bookshelves. This bill really is unnecessary, creates confusion, and it sends the message that sexually explicit material and pornographic material is okay for school libraries.
Senator Peake.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the patron. Is censor or censoring defined anywhere in the code?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just briefly address, It probably is, and I think council can point to that. But in this section of the code, if I could just address what was previously said, it might answer your question.
Okay.
So the previous speaker pointed to a case in Missouri. So one thing I want to make clear is that this legislation has nothing to do with public libraries. We're only talking about schools, and in fact, we're only talking about the issue of parental notification. So the language that was passed in 2022 regarding parental notification stays entirely intact. So if you're looking at the legislation, there is not any change to what we passed in 2022, and it clearly spells out that this is ensuring parental notification, it is directly identifying the specific instructional material and sexually explicit subjects, and 3, it is permitting the parent of any student to review instructional material that includes. That is the original language that we passed in 2022. Nothing has changed, and in fact, what we're doing is restoring the enactment clause that was also passed in 2022, restoring the enactment clause without any change so that it appears fully in our online materials, online Virginia code, and so that everybody has a clear understanding that nothing in this section, any model policy or amendments thereto adopted by the department are going to be construed to permit the censoring of books in any public elementary or secondary school. That was the enactment clause in 2022. I believe, Senator, you voted yes to that bill, that legislation in 2022. This is simply taking it out of the enactment clause and putting it directly into the legislation. So that is the only change that we're doing, taking that same language and now putting it directly into the bill itself.
Mr. Chair, so reading the last 2 lines, shall be construed to permit the censoring. And that's my question. Who determines whether or not they're censoring?
Well, Mr. Chair and Senator Peake, the same language is what the language you voted on in the 2022 bill, and maybe council can answer your original question about the definition of censorship in our Virginia code.
Mr. Chairman?
Maybe before I come to you, let me add to that too, which is to say that every locality has a process by which they can remove books. And what some localities are doing is taking this code section and using it as a way to get around that process to ban books in bulk. So for example, you had a locality in the capital region that used this code section to take around 75 books out of the libraries. There are many reasons why you want to have conversations about different books, and every locality has that policy for how to do that and what the particular process is. So I think that goes a little bit to your question about who's defining what's censoring, right? Which is to say that I think localities using this code section as a way to go around the ordinary process that involves stakeholders is I think, part of the answer. Maybe not, maybe. But.
Mr. Chairman, it
Yep.
seems that localities have been using this section, and y'all don't like the way they've been doing it, so now you're trying to change it and say that it's censoring because they've been removing books that are sexually explicit from elementary schools or wherever, certain localities. Now this bill, it looks like it wants to call it censoring and then prevent them from doing that. And so that's my whole point. And to take it back to the other gentleman who spoke earlier, Mr. Chairman, there are certain books that are racially offensive that are no longer carried in our school libraries. Is that censoring, or is that just removing books that are offensive to students? And based on this language, who gets to decide?
Mr. Chairman, if I could reiterate the point that you made, and I just want to reiterate it and clarify it. We're talking about 2 entirely different things, Senator Peake. There is the parental notification, parental consent, and that is what this section of the code sought to do in 2022, and it passed out of both chambers and was signed into law. So we're talking about parental consent, parental notification. Now, the idea of assessing what books or materials should be included or not included in a school library or a school classroom library. That is a different process entirely. And school boards have processes in place where materials may be challenged. So challenging material versus notifying parents are two entirely different things. This section of the code seeks to address the issue of parental notification. The only thing this bill is doing is taking the enactment clause that was originally passed and restoring it to the full legislation so it's quite clear what parental notification means.
Senator Pekarsky?
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to report this to full committee, and I'll second it with Senator Locke's proxy.
All right, there's been a motion and there has been a second to recommend reporting Senate Bill 235. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? No. All right.
Ayes 3, noes 2.
That motion passes 3-2.
Thank you.
Senator. Senator Steff, you're up next. Senator Steff, you have